Hello everyone and welcome to yet another day in this, the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better, and if you would like to keep up with all things Clown Decade, please do subscribe to the channel and of course become a member. Today we are talking about a subject that has always been a bit cringe, but to be honest I've always been a bit of a subscriber of, and that is horseshoe theory. People seem to think that when people throw out the horseshoe theory thing, it's, well, people not understanding the positions of the, let's say, far left and far right, and instead saying they actually agree on everything when really the point is they have pretty much the exact same philosophy. This, by the way, is exactly why James Lindsay throwing out the label woke right, and despite throwing the net out too wide, I would say, has really got the label to stick to some degree, because frankly, yeah, I mean, these people admit this, they are postmodernists who are using the same weaponry and philosophy as the woke left, but doing it in a more, quote, based and right-wing direction. And it's just embarrassing for all of them, frankly. But today I noticed something in the news that really made me think, it's kind of worth covering this, and then because people have asked me to cover the final collapse of Homeland, really setting them aside as simply, quite literally, a protest party, which, you know, has its place, but I don't think they'll be doing too much more than organising hotel protests after this. Anyway, I'll make you wait for my short coverage on that. Firstly, Zarah Sultana, Jeremy Corbyn capitulates on anti-Semitism as Labour leader. The MP's claim has been called a grave insult by the Board of Deputies of British Jews, because if there was one thing that really tore Corbyn's entire premiership apart, it was simply for the fact that anti-Semitism was tolerated in the party, I think it's fair to say. So the co-founder of Jeremy Corbyn's new political party has accused him of capitulating on anti-Semitism while being leader of the Labour Party. Really not a good start to all this, by the way. I could really do with them having some sort of organisation and look coherent, because we really need the left-wing vote split. Zarah Sultana said Corbyn should not have accepted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism because it famously equates it with anti-Zionism. Well, that's largely because an awful lot of people who are openly anti-Zionist tend to use the term Jew and Zionist quite interchangeably. The whole Ethan Klein H3H3 drama going over in the American spheres of YouTube really show this off quite well. Labour incorporated the definition into its code of conduct in July 2018, but did not include all its examples, including claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavour. Which is quite funny, because surely by the same logic, the existence of any state is a racist endeavour anyway. Corbyn was eventually stripped of the Labour whip after refusing to acknowledge a report on the prevalence of anti-Semitism during his leadership of the party between 2015 and 2020, claiming it was dramatically overstated for political reasons. That may well be true. It's hard for anyone really to say, but God, even I remember those days. I do remember it being in the news a lot, with a fair few examples, and people obviously having to be kicked out. Hell, Diane Abbott momentarily lost the whip for saying you can't be racist against Jews, or at least racism against black people is worse than racism against Jews, which is taking the oppression Olympics to a ridiculous degree. Speaking to the New Left Review journal, Sultana said Corbyn's Labour had capitulated to the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which famously equates it with anti-Zionism, and which even its lead author Kenneth Stern has now publicly criticised. Which I had a quick look at the IHRA's definition of anti-Semitism, and the full definition is anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions, and religious facilities. And I even did a quick search for Zion to look for any sort of Zionism in this website, or web page technically, and there's no results whatsoever. So not sure what that's about, because there are plenty of examples there, and well, that's a little bit of a wide net to define anti-Semitism, I would say, because rhetorical manifestations of anti-Semitism directed towards Jewish community institutions or religious facilities, I mean, does that include criticism? I do not know. However, it is important to point out that if your main issue is with the anti-Zionism type issue, well, it doesn't seem to be there anyway, so not sure what she's talking about, but there we go. Anyway, the Board of Deputies of British Jews accused Sultana of a grave insult, pointing out that the IHRA definition has been adopted by the government and public institutions in this country and around the world, and is supported by the overwhelming majority of British Jews, as it is clear and measured in defining anti-Semitism. And I will say, I have not seen the same problems with this definition as we are seeing with the definition of Islamophobia. So I'd argue it's worth bearing that in mind. Sultana, the MP for Coventry South, quit Labour last month to found a new party with Jeremy Corbyn. The party claims to have attracted 700,000 supporters, being people who've basically signed up to the email list, and will decide on its name at a conference in the autumn. Sultana said she wants to call the new party the Left and will focus on more time with our loved ones, more green space, universal childcare, free public transport, and not worrying about bills. Doesn't it just sound like utopia? God, 10% of people, hypothetically, are going to vote for this party, by the way, as the polls stand now. Which just translates into my head that 10% of the population are literally children. The party would build on the strengths of Corbynism, energy, blah blah blah, you get the idea. In addition to its stance on anti-Semitism, she said Labour didn't make a real effort to channel its mass membership into the Labour movement or tenants' union, which would have enriched the party's social base. They did get the most votes Labour ever got, though, to be fair, so they must have done something right. But anyway, we're getting off topic here. We're here to talk about the whole Jew thing, which obviously the far left are quite famous for not particularly liking. Marx wrote about the Jewish question. Quite a lot of communists basically use the term capitalist and Jew interchangeably. Obviously, it broke apart Corbyn's Labour Party. Lots of examples of far lefties not liking Jews, and hell, when you know it, it's the same on the far right. Anyway, the New Statesman had a pretty good analysis of this whole situation before I move on to the far right. Sultana's comments in the NLR, New Left Review, revealing her explicit criticism of Corbynism's dealings with anti-Semitism, expose a crucial fault line in the development of your party, as it is currently known. Many of Corbyn's allies see accusations of anti-Semitism as responsible for the destruction of his Labour project. In describing his actions as capitulation, Sultana risks transferring these accusations across to your party. Considering how significant this criticism was for Corbyn's leadership, it is a problem that your party, which is still in its infancy, may find difficult to counter. The outspokenness of his co-founder is already seen by some around Corbyn as a fatal flaw in her future leadership. Briefings against Sultana by others close to the process have accused the MP of Coventry South of jumping the gun, with her premature announcement of a new party that have criticised her lack of experience. Yes, that's among with all her other issues of being a bit mental. But the point being is that in extreme parties, either on the left or right, there always seems to be conversations about Jews which always hide themselves under the cover of talking about Israel and Zionism, and as we're about to go through, both sides tear themselves into pieces over it. Because while it's quite clear that, okay, it's just Zarah Sultana talking about this, but there was an issue within Corbyn's party about not going on about Israel enough, and hell, one of their party conferences, they didn't have a single Union Jack, but the whole crowd had Palestine flags. It just shows you how deep the rot is. However, we're going to move over to Homeland now, which actually is a political party at the moment, and let's all face it, in hindsight was doing better than anyone expected, including me. So recently with Homeland, obviously, we had the original collapse thanks to the Femboy being the regional organiser of Northern Ireland. That everyone got a bit mad over because obviously of the very recent history of, let's call it private matters that he was enjoying exclusively with black men. And, well, the thing is that Homeland is quite explicitly a white nationalist party. Though to be fair to them, they have been doing their best to try and contain that part and effectively try and actually be appealing to normies because, as I keep saying, no extremist party survives first contact with the normies because the normies do not want extremism, incredibly. But anyway, there was an open letter to the National Council, written and signed by a number of members, especially high-profile ones like Steve Laws and Zuma Historian. And, well, they had a few issues specifically with the leadership that they did not like, and we'll focus on the whole Israel thing for now, but you'll see it comes right after sensible nationalism, Which, don't worry, I'm going to be going through the funny parts of this after. I just want to get the Israel thing out of the way. So when it comes to Israel, we hold that although nationalists have no business interfering or taking interest in foreign conflicts, we're going to make it the second point of our interest, we maintain that support for the Zionist state is totally incompatible with nationalism from the perspective of our people. Israel was founded by terrorists who killed British soldiers, and their seditious acts throughout the modern age have caused untold destruction. I certainly agree with the first part. There were Israelis, terrorists, who did kill British soldiers, absolutely. What was it? King David Hotel got bombed. Killed, I think, dozens of British soldiers. Sure. I mean, let's be real, though. You know, our neighbours over in Scotland, not Scotland, though even when we had the Act of Union, actually, you know, there were Scottish people that had killed English years before that, but I meant Ireland, a lot more recent. They were bombing areas like Manchester and Warrington, and, well, since the Good Friday Agreement, let's be real, nobody is as scared of the Irish as we are now, and, well, we consider them neighbours. Only in recent months has Kenny Smith stated that we are anti-Zionist and anti-Islam. However, there is clearly an agenda to avoid ever being critical of Israel, most evident by the total lack of posts when it seems that Israel and its neighbouring countries were about to enter war, and when the RAF was already intercepting missiles. Go British RAF, thank God they're doing something useful. But realistically, defending who is now an ally is hardly controversial, and frankly all you have to do is look at the Labour Party under Corbyn to understand why having a go at Israel so openly is, one, just a distraction from your point anyway, and two, going to cripple you as a party. It's complete cowardice from the National Council, often justified with a phrase of, we don't want people claiming that we are anti-Semitic and that our nationalism is based on the hatred of Israel. In that case, we might as well drop nationalism so we don't get called racist. Which just goes to show how silly these people are. What happened to the nationalism that stood firm on its beliefs without fear of name-calling? Yes, well, this is what happens when you actually start to try and make it somewhere in the political realm and in elections. Otherwise, you might end up being beaten by, I don't know, someone from the psychedelic movement party. The lack of a firm position on Israel has on multiple occasions led to Zionists joining the party, and then upon realising that the overwhelming majority of members do not support their cause, they then turn to calling people Nazis and attacking us publicly, leading to reputational damage, namely Pete North. Yeah, well, Pete North was right on that. Again, if you've all missed this drama, I have covered it before in previous videos. But, wow, believe it or not, party that's openly far-right, anti-Semitic, who would have thought? But I think the funniest part of this is it really shows where the split was in the Homeland Party, because after being interviewed by The Times, Alexander Bramham was showing off, obviously, or I've been interviewed by The Times because I joined an openly anti-Semitic party, and then joined the Tories, and I was thinking, how's he able to get away with that? Basically, unless he was some sort of spy. And so I made the point that, you know, this party had high-profile activists who were openly anti-Semitic. My big one, obviously, being this particular tweet from Steve Laws, who said, imagine my shock, where it has a picture of Robert Jemrick with his social media guy in a yarmulke, with Steve Laws saying, obviously, imagine my shock. And obviously, it was no secret that Homeland split off from Patriotic Alternative, who, as well, were openly anti-Semitic, and the split wasn't down to anti-Semitism, it was down to the way Patriotic Alternative stayed as a pressure group and was not being made a party, and also something to do with funds not being used in the way that Kenny would like. To which Alex said to me, Steve was asked to delete that and eventually forced out altogether by what appeared to be a more moderate leadership. Despite his noise on social media, none of Steve's proposals were ever accepted as policy, and he failed, which is all well and good, but my point is, how have you missed all this? And my other point is, isn't it quite clear that extremes in politics do have a bit of a horseshoe in that they both absolutely hate Israel? It's the same with Russia as well, by the way. The extremes seem to absolutely love Russia. And it's hard to quite put my finger down on why, because it seems to be for two completely different reasons. But really the main philosophy of it is effectively, these are Western countries. Ukraine, it's very corrupt, don't get me wrong, but it's way closer to the rest of Europe than Russia. And obviously, Israel versus Gaza, guess which one is seen as more European? And so I thought it was just worth going through before I have a bit of a laugh at Homeland. Anyway, I think I've made my main point, so let's get on to laughing at the Homeland Party and their second collapse. Some of the main problems these activists and members have was effectively that Kenny was taking far too many trips to Europe, effectively would overindulge himself with his trips to Europe, effectively try and get in with more elite circles, and it would basically annoy everyone at home because it looked more like a vanity project for Kenny than it looked like for some serious nationalism from the right wing and ethno-nationalist and white nationalist side of the argument. They also had an issue with appealing to a mythical moderate Joe Public. Effectively, these activists who, when they have stood in elections previously, as I say, barely get 100 votes. It's pointless, though, to be fair, their specifics are you're trying to appeal to Joe Public with gay spaces policy and other political blunders, which was viewed as necessary to attain a mass movement. And I'm not going to lie to you, going the other direction on that is probably much, much worse. Basically, they viewed anything that the National Council and Kenny did as politically expedient as being effectively against the whole point of the party, which to my mind screams they don't particularly care about getting elected, they just want to chud out, which seems to be a common thing these days. They also had a go at the National Council for the infamous gay spaces policy again. Honestly, I didn't follow them enough to know what that even means. As far as I'm aware, the ongoing, I guess, theory was that Kenny Smith effectively was trying to get on the New Culture Forum, which is obviously headed by Peter Whittle, who is a gay man. So they imagined that that was just to appease him so that Kenny could actually get onto the alternative media. Anyway, the National Council called, well, many people in the membership and officer class retarded and spasticated, among other slurs, but Kenny Smith himself for perceived infractions and minor statements in ex-post, among other things. Most of this abuse is not directed at the individuals themselves, but close personal friends and colleagues in an attempt to isolate and demonise them. Which I have to say, for people like Steve Laws and Zoomer Historian, who basically are going about trying to call everyone slurs, I don't see why taking it should be any worse than giving it out, but there we go. They also had a similar complaint, but specifically mentioned that Steve Laws, Zoomer Historian, were two people and activists who were attacked by the, well, Kenny Smith, I guess, because, well, they're idiots. What more is there to say? And, well, they didn't appreciate that. Tough, I guess. But I have to say, one of the funnier ones here is the the institutionalised informing and reporting on each other. Somehow a party of about 1,000 members had its own Stasi. This practice is particularly encouraged and enforced by Kenny Smith. There is a large amount of pressure placed on people to inform on others within the party who are critical of the leadership or direction of the party. This isolates individuals from their friends, who, in most cases, they've been fellow activists for years. The informing culture led to high levels of paranoia amongst the ranks, and for people to distrust friends and excommunicate former friends on the suspicion that they are snitches, especially when it has been confirmed to be the case. I'm not being funny, I'm not even aware of this being the case in Reform. There are people I know who I could probably report to Reform and they'd be kicked out, but I haven't done it because the culture's not there. This is despite the fact it is 250 times bigger than the Homeland Party. They say it's completely unsustainable, which, I mean, to be honest, this is the least of your worries. Telling the leadership that there are anti-Semites and people that hate Kenny Smith in the membership is the least of your worries. So they want to amend this, but really, who cares? Because I'm not going to go through the amendments that they want, because it basically comes down to kick Kenny Smith out and put us in charge. So that's basically what it came down to. And their argument isn't even that bad, because at the end of the day, they are the reason there is a party in the first place anyway, because they had a lot of followers of theirs join the Homeland Party. Anyway, their demands on policy include sensible nationalism, core nationalistic viewpoints and rhetoric, but presented in a way that is appealing to the general public. That's what Kenny was trying to do, by the way, without compromise. You can't appeal to the general public without compromise. Are you mental? And without the negative aesthetics that have harmed nationalism, i.e. no swastikas. Sensible nationalism has never advertised to include policies in making LGBT spaces, fair promotion of Donald Trump, come on, an aversion to taking any firm stances on any hot-button political issues of the day. This is the firm definition of sensible nationalism and is non-negotiable. Anyway, they go straight on to complain about Israel, which we've already gone through. Another demand was the British family. Kenny's unilateral decision to include the concept of the British family in our party's vernacular was seen as outrageous by a large number of members who did not consider this thinking to be in line with their understanding of nationalism. I don't understand what the British nationalism is if it doesn't start with British families. What are you talking about? This softening of our ideology was made to appeal to the audience of civic nationalist figures who remained in the party for less than a month and caused nothing but trouble, and was also rushed into an officer role despite having no proven track record and only having a moderately sized online following as his qualifications. So, yeah, that basically makes him the same as everyone else in the party then who's high up. Kenny's statements on Mark Heath's podcast regarding the British family were immensely flawed, saying an individual as part of the British family was dangerously on the line of saying they were British. Mixed heritage children do hold British heritage, but their non-British parent is not British, and dancing around this with the British family comment was foolish. If a distinction was made that they are not ethnically British, this could have been avoided. Oh, I remember now, yes. That is very funny, though, because Zuma Historian is actually married to a Latvian. But at the end of the day, you've really got to realise that when these people say British, they just mean white. They do understand how to code their language, they just don't want to do it too much because, well, they'd end up sounding like me. So I'm very glad that they don't do that. Anyway, everyone said that this was a bit civic nationalist, and Steve Laws had to throw out a clarifier saying, oh, by the way, Kenny definitely only means Europeans. Well, actually, it says at the bottom, most members will agree that non-Europeans or those of radically dissimilar cultures are unable to truly integrate even if they marry a British person and form a family with them. In time, the descendants of such marriages would be British. I obviously don't agree with this. I think there are plenty of non-Europeans who have ended up marrying into British families and being indistinguishable from other British natives. Aside from maybe skin colour, whatever, who cares? Anyway, to finish off, there was the whole thing about the British issue. They agree that our founding decision to reject the traditional red, white and blue aesthetics that have dominated our movement for a long time. The party leadership has developed an odd and irrational aversion to the concept of Britishness, justified with the contention that British is a complex civic identity that complicates our ethnicity-based view of nationalism. This is nonsense. I actually do agree, by the way. Britain is multi-ethnic, no doubt about that, and Britishness is actually largely more a civic identity, but I'm kind of with them on this. You do actually have a version of the Briton that is a person from the British Isles, no matter where on the British Isles they are from. But we're getting into semantics there, and really overall, I don't really care. I'm not basing policy off it. Obviously, they quite like the remigration policy. It's a national environment of mass protest and civil unrest. The Homeland Party should be leading the national conversation, but the policy is less authoritative than UKIP, Britain First and Rupert Lowe. In recent weeks, Reform have rapidly moved right on the deportation issue, moving from deport all illegals and criminals to deport all illegals and criminals. As a nationalist party, we cannot be outflanked by civic nationalists on the issue of the day, and yet you think you are. But then again, Steve Laws would never be happy until basically all black and brown people are gone. And finally, they have a go at Pete North. If you don't know who Pete North is, he is a man who writes an awful lot and is apparently right-wing and doesn't really know where to land. 2 weeks ago, he was loving Kemi Badenoch. This week, he's saying she needs to be gotten rid of. And they don't like Pete North because, well, he was too much of a pro-Israel guy, which happens to be one of his better takes. But anyway, he was quite open about calling an awful lot of people in the party basically useless because they were a bit too Nazi. This was all stuff that people like me even said to him months ago, and, well, we were just thrown to the wayside and basically called woke. Well, an awful lot of people who joined the party, somehow missing all the open anti-Semitism, somehow then found out a couple of weeks later that actually, yeah, there's a lot of anti-Semites in an openly anti-Semitic party. Who would have thunk? Anyway, Homeland did make a response to all this because, after all, they did a live stream on Twitter as well, basically saying that they were too empathetic toward the people behind these attacks, and they actually named them Kai Stevens, who is a troubled young man who acts on impulse with little regard for others. We have invested heavily in him, shielding him during serious personal and legal difficulties and absorbing public criticism on his behalf. We've had to apologise for him countless times to our own members. We thought he was improving, but not. And after the support, this salary repays us. Alright. Jerome O'Reilly, who was the treasurer, no longer a party member, proven less than competent, losing the keys to £2,000 worth of Bitcoin. How do you even manage that? We replaced him with a very effective Daniel Gale in January and promoted Tom Batten to East Midlands Regional Officer or organiser in his place. Jerome remained Wales Regional Organiser but achieved little and leaked snippets of National Council business. In April, we thanked him for his good work and asked him to resign quietly so he could keep his reputation, and he's repaid that discretion by spreading dissent. He didn't renew his membership, so we don't know why he thinks he should have a say in how the party is run now. And finally, Sam Wilkes, who is Zoomer historian, immature online commentator hiding behind a pseudonym who cannot work in a team, recruited a group of non-members to attack the party rather than resolve disagreements face-to-face and ran away when confronted. He claims to be a nationalist yet contributes nothing to the struggle while attacking those who do, and he pushes a hard line and he will not follow himself. When Kenny said on a live stream that he would not deport someone's Portuguese wife, Wilkes attacked him even though Wilkes has brought his Latvian wife and children to the UK. Hilarious. Yeah, this is something that also happens with left-wingers, by the way. I'm sure, actually, Zarah Sultana falls into this. But they'll have a load of anti-white, anti-British rhetoric even, and then they'll marry a white Brit. Ash Sarkar's done this. Zarah Sultana, I'm pretty sure, has done this. Quite a few non-white, for lack of a better term, woke activists end up marrying white British leftists. Happens an awful lot. It's mad. And obviously the same thing happens on the extreme right. You have this ethnic mixing, I guess you can call it, and some of the biggest people going on that side of things tend to have skeletons in their closets that go against that principle. It's exactly like all the biggest anti-homosexual politicians all ending up being caught in gay orgies. Anyway, they do reply to an awful lot of the complaints rather sensibly, to be quite honest with you. Most interesting one I want to pick out is appealing to the public. Our aim is to promote nationalism to a broad an audience as possible. Pitching it so narrowly that it appeals only to a select few will be political suicide, and we don't apologise for that. Joe Public is not a myth. They are an average disaffected man and woman, men and women, whatever, who might be naturally nationalistic but turned off by the aggressive aesthetics or erratic rhetoric. Our goal has never been to dilute our ideas, but to present them with maturity and nuance. I don't think Kenny does that. He does it better than Steve Laws, I'll give him that, but not very well. We are trying to build something new, and it's notable that authors of this letter do not want to help build, but all they want to do is tear us down. Yeah, we're noticing that over in Reform as well, I have to say. There's quite a few people I could name who are doing nothing but trying to tear them down, and all that really does is help the Tory party, but hey, there we go. Anyway, the British family issue is another one I want to quickly go through. A clipped live stream segment showed Kenny saying he would not deport an Englishman's Portuguese wife, who is the mother of his children. Critics leap from that remark to the fancy that we have adapted a Sivnat line where anyone can be British. Bad actors lifted a few seconds of a much larger broadcast, ripped it from context and circulated it to smear the party. Kenny was speaking about a hypothetical involving a family. He was not announcing policy on air. Oh well, this is a Reform Party issue too. We do not make policy ad hoc in live streams. All policy is published in writing and is crystal clear on genuine nationalism. There is no mention anywhere of a wider British family concept. One off-the-cuff remark months ago, taken out of context, does not override our written position. Anyone can confirm this simply by reading policy. The fact that the authors still go on about this months after, as though it was a significant gaffe, shows their own lack of perspective. I have to agree with that. Anyway, long story short, Homeland are keeping these people kicked out. They're keeping Kenny Smith in place. And frankly, I think they're going to be less of a party in future and more of a pressure group anyway. Because as silly and unpopular as I think some of their policy is, which it's not actually as bad as it will have been before, their activists that do remain are still, well, organising protests. And they're actually fairly successful. Now, obviously, they're not the only ones organising protests. However, they were the ones to sort of start the firing gun, and other grassroots organisations have come out of that. But IHRA, Clegg, who was a Tory for some years, by the way, moved over to the Homeland and seems to be one of the more sensible ones, despite trying to look a lot like Dr. Robotnik. And this is one of those good things I think they're doing that I don't have too much to complain about. They throw it away in interviews because they're never going to get away from the fact that they did have a load of neo-Nazis in their party and a load of anti-Semites. But, well, same thing happens on the extreme left. Where do you expect that to go? Not to a winning position. And the funny part, just to bookend this with another bit of Horseshoe, is that one of the most far-left crazies, or at least his brother that we can find, Piers Corbyn, turned up at the Epping protest as well. I'm not going through this because he does just say crazy things, and I think it's better for you to go through it in your own time. But it is funny how these far lefties and far righties do end up shaking hands on quite a few issues. Anyway, I think I will leave it there, and once again, no doubt I will be saying this will be the last time I cover Homeland, but knowing them, there will be some other major gaffe that happens that I will go over just because it's funny, but I'm glad that I could go over the Homeland drama to make some of you happy. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you for today. So tonight we have some Tosh news. Thursday we have Hollow Knight, and Saturday we have Laughing at the Guardian, so do look forward to all that. Videos out as and when I can make them. If you enjoy what I do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. Great ways to help me out in the algorithm. And do, of course, become a member or leave super chat or super thanks in any video that I do. Right, with that, that's everything I had for you for today. Once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.